The screaming started before the sensors even registered the ships, because the universe itself was being torn open in a way that the physics of the Imperium did not understand. The void monitors on Outpost Delta 9 did not show the purple bruises of a warp storm or the bleeding reality of a chaos rift. They showed clean white lines that snapped into existence like a whip, cracking against the dark. Space folded, then the wedges appeared. They were white and grey daggers the size of hive cities. They did not look like the holy ships of the Imperial Navy. They had no statues of saints on their hulls. They had no gold eagles. They had no flying buttresses or Gothic arches. They were smooth and cold and silent. Senior Scribe Harlan stared at his green glass screen. His hands shook in his fingerless gloves. He had categorized raid fleets from Orcs and Eldar for 40 years on this lonely rock. He knew the clumsy rust ships of the greenskins and the sleek glass solar sails of the elves. These were different. These were made by men. But they were not men of the Emperor. The Voxcaster crackled to life. The voice was crisp and arrogant. It did not sound like the heavy Gothic chant of the Imperial Navy. It spoke high Gothic, but with a strange flatness and an accent that sounded like a machine trying to be a person. It demanded immediate surrender in the name of the Galactic Empire. Harlan looked at Magos X-10. The cyborg priest made a sound of grinding gears. The machine spirit of the station was confused. The logic engines could not find these ships in the databanks. There was no record of a galactic empire in the history of the Ultima Segmentum. The station commander was a heavy man named Karas. He stood up from his command throne. The leather of his coat creaked. He did not hesitate. He did not ask questions. To be unknown was to be a heretic. To demand surrender from a servant of the God Emperor was death. Karas ordered the defense batteries to fire. The macro cannons on the station shook the floor plates. Giant shells the size of buildings launched into the dark. They were weapons meant to crack heavy armor. They flew toward the lead white dagger. Harlan watched the screen. He expected the shells to hit void shields. He expected the blue flare of energy that stopped all weapons in the galaxy. But there were no void shields. The white ship relied on something else. Green beams of light lanced out from the dagger. They were faster than anything Harlan had ever seen. They intercepted the physical shells in deep space. The explosions were bright yellow flowers blooming in the dark. The shells never reached the target. The crew on the bridge went silent. They had never seen a ship shoot down macro shells with such speed and precision. Then the green beams turned toward the station. They did not fire one by one. They fired in a wall of light. The station void shields flared. They turned from invisible to blinding blue. The station groaned. Metal screamed as the energy hammered against the protective bubble. Harlan saw the power levels drop. 100%, 50%, 10%. The generator room reported fire. The servitors in the walls burst into flames. The machine spirit screamed in binary code. Commander Karas drew his bolt pistol. He knew the shields would fail in seconds. He shouted a prayer to the Golden Throne. He told them to die well. The green light punched through the shields. It hit the station armor. The metal evaporated. It did not melt. It simply vanished. Harlan felt the heat rise instantly. The air turned to ash in his mouth. He typed one last message on his cogitator. It was a warning code. It was the code for a Crusade-level threat. He sent the signal into the deep dark using the astropathic choir. Then the hull breached. The silence of the void rushed in. The station broke into a million pieces of burning debris. The white daggers moved past the wreckage. They did not slow down. They did not stop to salvage. They moved toward the inner systems with perfect formation. Behind them, Thousands of white armor soldiers stood in rows on troop transports. They held black rifles. They waited for orders. In the wreckage of the station, a single distress buoy beeped. It carried the message of a dead man. It warned the sector governor that a new enemy had arrived. It warned that the enemy was human. It warned that they did not know the Emperor. And it warned that they had enough ships to blot out the stars. The debris drifted into the path of the fleet. A small TIE fighter zoomed past the wreckage. It scanned the dead bodies floating in the cold. It found no life signs. It signaled back to the main destroyer. The sector was open. The invasion had begun. The message from the dead outpost traveled through the warp. It moved slower than a starship, but faster than light. It was a scream in the minds of the blind men who listened to the dark. On the planet Orestes Prime, the astropathic choir woke up screaming. 3 of them died instantly. Their brains boiled inside their skulls. The surviving telepaths fell to the floor shaking. They babbled about white daggers and cold lights. The master of the choir recorded their words with a quill on parchment. He sealed the scroll with red wax. He handed it to a servitor. The cyborg drone took the scroll and walked slowly through the long stone halls of the governor's palace. It took 6 hours for the message to reach the waiting room of Governor Vance. It took another 4 hours for the clerks to sort it. They put it in a pile of reports about grain quotas and water reclamation issues. The Imperium of Man was vast, and it moved with the speed of a glacier. A threat that destroyed a station in seconds became a piece of paper that sat on a desk for a day. Governor Vance was a fat man who liked wine and soft velvet robes. He did not like bad news. When he finally read the report, he laughed. He wiped grease from his chin. He told his generals that it was a pirate raid. He said no human force outside the Imperium had ships like that. He said the survivors were hallucinating. He threw the report into the fire. He did not order the planetary defense batteries to stand by. He did not call the Imperial Guard regiments from their barracks. He poured another glass of wine. 2 days later, the sky turned dark. The sensors on the orbital moon of Orestes Prime beeped. The operators looked at their screens in confusion. They saw 1 ship appear, then 2, then 10, then 50. They did not come from the warp. There was no tear in reality. They just slid into existence from a strange dimension of blue swirling light. The ships were massive grey triangles. They hung in the void like arrowheads pointed at the heart of the planet. They were perfectly geometrical. They were clean. They did not have the oil and smoke and Gothic statues of imperial ships. They looked like machines made by people who did not fear God. The lead ship was larger than the others. It cast a shadow over the sensor moon. A voice came over the open frequency. It was broadcast to the entire planet. It was a calm voice. It was the voice of Admiral Thrawn of the Galactic Empire. He stated that the system was now under the jurisdiction of the Empire. He demanded the immediate surrender of all planetary leaders. He demanded the deactivation of all weapons. He promised order and security. He gave them 1 hour to comply. Governor Vance stood on his balcony. He looked up at the sky. He could see the white shapes even in the daylight. He felt fear for the first time in his life, but he also felt anger. He was a governor of the Imperium. He served the God Emperor of mankind. To surrender to a stranger was heresy. Heresy was worse than death. Vance ran to his command center. He shouted at his generals. He ordered the activation of the Sky Shield defense laser. The Sky Shield was an ancient weapon. It was a massive cannon built into the side of the highest mountain. It was the size of a hive spire. Thousands of tech priests lived inside the gun. They prayed to the machine spirit of the weapon. They anointed the gears with sacred oil. They began the chanting to wake the reactor. It took 30 minutes for the gun to power up. The Empire ships waited. They did not fire. They hovered in perfect formation. Admiral Krenel watched the heat signature of the mountain rise on his screen. He turned to his gunnery officer. He gave a small nod. The Star Destroyer, relentless, fired its main turbo laser batteries. Green bolts of energy the size of trains shot down from orbit. They did not scatter. They hit the mountain with surgical precision. The first bolt vaporized the radar dish. The second bolt melted the armor plating over the reactor. The third bolt punched deep into the mountain. The sky shield detonated. The explosion was so bright it blinded people looking out their windows in the capital city 500 miles away. The mountain collapsed. The ancient weapon was gone before it had fired a single shot. The governor stared at the static on his screen. The Empire had not just defeated the weapon. They had erased it. The hour passed. The Empire did not wait for a second refusal. The invasion began. The sky filled with noise. It was not the roar of drop pods screaming through the atmosphere. It was the high-pitched whine of ion engines. Thousands of landing craft descended from the triangles. They were shaped like boxes with folding wings. They were escorted by small fighters that looked like eyeballs with solar panels on the sides. These TIE fighters screamed as they flew. They strafed the airfields of the Planetary Defense Force. The PDF scrambled their Thunderbolt heavy fighters. The Imperial fighters were tough and heavy. They had thick armor and projectile autocannons. They flew like bricks with massive engines. The TIE fighters were fragile and fast. They danced around the Thunderbolts. Green lasers chewed through the thick iron wings of the Imperial planes. The PDF pilots tried to turn and fight, but the enemy was too agile. Burning thunderbolts fell from the sky like rain. The Empire cleared the airspace over the capital city in 20 minutes. The landing craft touched down in the main spaceport. The ramps lowered. The stormtroopers marched out. They did not charge screaming like orcs. They did not run in loose mobs like cultists. They walked in perfect rows. Their armor was white and spotless. It covered their faces. They looked like skeletons made of plastic. They held black blaster rifles. They took up positions behind crates and walls. They set up heavy repeating blasters on tripods. They moved with a strange unity. They did not shout prayers. They gave short-coded orders. The PDF rushed to meet them. The local soldiers wore flak vests and carried laser guns. They outnumbered the stormtroopers 10-1. The PDF commander blew a whistle. A wave of 1,000 men charged across the tarmac. They shouted, "For the Emperor!" They fired their laser guns. Red beams of light snapped across the open ground. The laser fire hit the white armor. Some of the stormtroopers fell. The last bolts burned black holes in the white plastoid. But many of the shots glanced off. The stormtroopers did not panic. They knelt down. They aimed. They fired. The sound of the battle changed. The Imperial laser guns made a sharp cracking noise. The Empire blasters made a hollow hissing sound. Red bolts went one way. Red bolts went the other way. The stormtrooper fire was devastating. The blaster bolts exploded when they hit flesh. They blew limbs off the PDF soldiers. The flak vest did nothing to stop the high-energy plasma. The first wave of the PDF was cut down in seconds. Bodies piled up on the concrete. The stormtroopers advanced over the dead. They stepped on the bodies of the loyalists. They did not stop to check for survivors. They secured the perimeter of the spaceport. More landing craft came down. This time they brought armor. Huge metal feet slammed onto the ground. The walkers were grey and tall. The AT-STs looked like plucked chickens made of iron. They walked on two legs. They had guns on their chins. They ran forward with a jerky mechanical speed. Behind them came the monsters. The AT-AT walkers were the size of city blocks. They looked like giant camels. The ground shook when they walked. Boom, boom, boom. The PDF soldiers in the trenches looked up in horror. They had never seen tanks with legs that tall. They fired rocket launchers at the legs. The rockets hit the heavy armor and exploded harmlessly. The AT-ATs turned their heavy cannons toward the PDF bunkers. Red fire obliterated the concrete pillboxes. The Empire was establishing a beachhead. They were efficient. They were winning. But the Imperium of Man does not understand defeat. It only understands sacrifice. In the command bunker, General Drax took control from the panic-stricken governor. Drax was a veteran of the Imperial Guard. He had fought Tyranids and Orcs. He did not care about white armor or walking tanks. He cared about logistics and volume of fire. He activated the Voxcaster. He called the 44th Orestes Heavy Armored Regiment. He called the 9th Infantry Siege Regiment. He emptied the barracks of the entire Hive City. He authorized the distribution of weapons to the civilian work gangs. He turned the city into a meat grinder. The Empire pushed out of the spaceport and into the streets of the Hive City. The Hive was a nightmare of Gothic architecture. The streets were narrow canyons between buildings that were miles high. Statues of saints looked down from the shadows. The air was thick with smog. The Stormtroopers found their range limited. The clean lines of fire they liked were gone. They were in a maze. The PDF had retreated, but the Imperial Guard had arrived. The Lehman Russ battle tanks rumbled down the main avenue. They were crude machines compared to the Empire's walkers. They ran on loud diesel engines that belched black smoke. They were covered in rivets and rust, but they carried battle cannons that fired high explosive shells the size of a man. The lead AT-ST Walker turned a corner and saw a lemon rust tank. The Walker fired its laser cannons. The red bolts splashed against the thick front armor of the tank. The paint burned off, but the metal held. The lemon rust fired. The physical shell flew across the street faster than the eye could follow. It hit the Walker in the cockpit. There was no energy shield to stop the kinetic impact. The shell smashed through the thin armor and exploded inside. The Walker blew apart. Metal shrapnel showered the stormtroopers below. The burning wreckage toppled over. The Imperial Guard tank crew cheered. They loaded another shell. The street fighting turned brutal. The stormtroopers were better trained. They used tactics. They used thermal detonators to clear rooms. They used smoke to cover their movement. But the Imperial Guard was relentless. For every guardsman the stormtroopers killed, 3 more took his place. The civilians joined the fight. Factory workers with hammers and wrenches attacked stormtroopers in the alleyways. Old men with shotguns fired from windows. The Empire soldiers were used to fighting rebels who wanted to stay alive. They were not used to fighting fanatics who wanted to die for a god. A squad of stormtroopers entered a cathedral to set up a sniper nest. They were attacked by a mob of flagellants. These were religious madmen who whipped themselves with barbed wire. The flagellants had bombs strapped to their chests. They ran at the white-armored soldiers screaming prayers. The stormtroopers shot them down, but the madmen kept running even with holes in their chests. They got close. They detonated. The explosion collapsed the cathedral roof. The entire squad was buried. Admiral Krenel watched the tactical map from his bridge. The clean red lines of his advance were stalling. The city was too dense. The population was too hostile. He had expected a quick surrender after the show of force. He did not understand this enemy. He saw a report from Sector 4. A platoon of stormtroopers had been overrun. The report said the enemy soldiers had used bayonets. They had fixed knives to their laser guns and charged into melee combat. The stormtroopers had panicked. They were trained for ranged warfare. They did not know how to fight savage men who used knives and teeth. Krenel frowned. He tapped his gloved finger on the console. He realized this was not a police action. He ordered the deployment of the heavy suppression units. He ordered the TIE bombers to level the residential districts. On the ground, the war escalated. The TIE bombers swooped low between the towers. They dropped blue proton bombs. Entire city blocks turned to dust. The civilian death toll rose to the millions in the first hour. But the Imperium did not break. General Drax ordered the Basilisk artillery batteries to fire. The Basilisks were parked miles away. They fired massive Earthshaker shells. They did not aim for specific targets. They grid-bombed the spaceport. The shells fell on the Empire's landing zone. Transports were destroyed on the ground. A fuel depot exploded. The clean white lines of the Empire's beachhead were churned into mud and craters. Night fell on Orestes Prime. The city was burning. The sky was lit up by the constant exchange of laser fire and tracer rounds. In the ruins of a manufactorum, a squad of Imperial guardsmen huddled in a crater. Sergeant Cull checked his ammo. He had 2 power packs left for his laser gun. He looked at the dead stormtrooper lying near the edge of the hole. He had crawled out to loot the body. He held up the stormtrooper's helmet. It was cracked. He looked at the dead man's face. It was a normal human face. The sergeant spat on the ground. He had thought they were machines. They were just men. Men could die. He looked at his squad. They were dirty and bloody and terrified. He told them to fix bayonets. He told them the Emperor was watching. Across the street, the stormtrooper commander, TK-421, signaled his men to hold. He looked at his scanner. It was jammed. The air was full of so much radiation and smoke that his advanced sensors were useless. He heard the chanting starting again, low and rhythmic, coming from the darkness. It sounded like thousands of voices speaking in unison. He gripped his blaster tighter. He had conquered 12 worlds for the Empire. He had fought Wookiees and Mandalorians. He had never felt this kind of cold dread. The enemy did not care about survival. They fought like the droid armies of old, but they were made of meat and blood. He saw movement in the smoke, a wall of silhouettes rising from the rubble. The chanting got louder. The Emperor protects. TK-421 switched his weapon to full auto. The Empire holding the spaceport and the upper atmosphere. They had technical superiority. Their ships were untouched. Their walkers were slaughtering tanks in the open. But the city itself remained a contest. The Imperium held the sewers, the ruins, and the deep bunkers. They had numbers that the Empire could not calculate. The initial shock of the invasion was over. The paralysis of the bureaucracy had passed. Now the Imperium was doing what it did best. It was grinding its own population into dust to clog the gears of the enemy. The message from Orestes Prime finally reached the subsector naval base at Cypra Mundi. It was not a warning anymore. It was a request for extermination. The message was simple. Xenos-aligned humans detected. Strength extremists. Mobilize the Astartes. The Empire believed they were fighting a rebellion. They believed they could break the will of the population through terror and superior firepower. They did not know that they had kicked a nest of hornets the size of a galaxy. They did not know that the Imperium of Man had been fighting a total war for 10,000 years. They did not know that on a battle barge entering the warp, giants in power armor were already praying to their weapons. The first day was over. The slaughter had just begun. The Empire had won the landing. Now they had to survive the planet. The dust of Orestes Prime was not just dirt. It was a mix of powdered concrete, dried blood, and industrial ash that had fallen for 5,000 years. It got into everything. By the third day of the invasion, the pristine white armor of the Stormtroopers was grey and brown. The joints of their suits began to grind. The fine sand clogged the cooling vents of the E-11 blaster rifles. The weapons overheated faster than the manual said they would. On the Empire's side, the war was becoming a maintenance nightmare. Logistics officers on the Star Destroyers screamed at their screens. They sent down crates of replacement filters and oil, but the shuttles were taking fire. The Imperial Guard had set up anti-air batteries in the ruins of the spires. They used quad cannons that fired thousands of solid bullets a minute. They did not use radar to aim. They used their eyes and thousands of tracer rounds. The sky over the capital was a web of fire. General Veers stood in the cockpit of his lead AT-AT Walker. The massive machine was named Thunderer. It walked down the wreckage of the greatest highway on the planet. The road was 6 lanes wide, but the Walker filled it completely. Veers looked at the holomap. The resistance was stiffening. The locals were not retreating anymore. They were digging holes in the road. They were hiding in the sewers. Veers saw a heat bloom on his sensor. A Lehman Russ tank was hiding behind a pile of rubble. Veers ordered his gunner to fire. The heavy red lasers struck the tank. The turret flew off. It spun in the air and crushed a squad of guardsmen. Veers nodded. The technology gap was still absolute. His machines were superior, but his progress was slow. The sheer amount of debris was blocking the path. The Empire had to blast a road through the city just to move forward. In the command bunker, General Drax looked at the casualty reports. He had lost 4 million men in 3 days. He did not blink. He did not weep. To him, these were not deaths. They were spent ammunition. He looked at the water ration report. The main aqueducts had been crushed by the walkers. The troops were drinking water from the cooling systems of the dead tanks. It was poisonous, but it kept them fighting for another day. Drax turned to his comms officer. He asked if the signal had been received. The officer nodded. The astropathic choir had burned out their brains to send the confirmation. Help was coming, but it would not be the Navy. The Navy was weeks away. The signal had reached a strike cruiser that was patrolling the nearby subsector. It was a ship of the Adeptus Astartes. It was the Black Templars. Drax felt a cold shiver in his spine. He was not afraid of dying. He was afraid of the Emperor's angels. They were not rescuers. They were executioners. The tactical situation changed at 0900 hours on the 4th day. The Empire had pushed the Imperial Guard back to the precinct fortress. This was a massive black castle in the center of the city. The walls were 10 meters thick. The Empire brought up their heavy artillery. They set up proton mortars. They began to hammer the walls. The noise was deafening. The ground shook constantly. Inside the fortress, the defenders sang hymns to drown out the explosions. Then the sensors on the Star Destroyer Relentless screamed. A ship had exited the warp just inside the system's gravity well. This was impossible according to the laws of physics the Empire knew. Hyperspace jumps required precise calculations and safe distance. This ship had torn a hole in reality right next to the planet. Admiral Krenel looked at the new ship on his screen. It was ugly. It looked like a floating cathedral made of dark iron. It had a giant prow that looked like a battering ram. It was covered in scars. It did not hail them. It did not ask for surrender. It accelerated toward the planet. Krenel ordered his TIE fighters to intercept. 3 squadrons of TIEs swarmed toward the strike cruiser. They looked like flies attacking a brick. The Imperial ship opened fire. It did not use precise lasers. It used defensive turrets that sprayed walls of explosive shells, the void of space filled with shrapnel. The TIE fighters flew into the metal cloud and were shredded. The strike cruiser did not stop. It drove straight into the upper atmosphere. It was performing a combat drop. On the surface, the stormtroopers looked up. The sky was streaked with fire. They thought it was a meteor shower. Then they saw the pods. They were black teardrops falling at supersonic speeds. They did not have retro rockets to slow them down softly. They relied on impact. They slammed into the ground behind the Empire's front lines. The concrete exploded. Dust clouds rose like mushrooms. The stormtroopers turned around. They aimed their weapons at the craters. They expected soldiers to crawl out. They expected men. The doors of the drop pods blew off with explosive bolts. The smoke cleared. Standing in the craters were giants. They were 7 feet tall. They wore power armor that was painted black with white crosses on the shoulders. They did not look like soldiers. They looked like walking tanks shaped like men. The lead giant, Castellan Draco, stepped forward. He held a bolt gun in one hand and a chainsword in the other. The chainsword roared to life. The teeth of the blade spun so fast they blurred. The stormtroopers hesitated. They had never seen anything like this. This hesitation was their death. "Purge the unclean," Draco roared. His voice was amplified by the grill of his helmet. It sounded like a landslide. The Space Marines charged. They moved too fast. A human brain could not process a 7-foot giant moving at 60 miles per hour. The stormtroopers fired their blasters. The red plasma bolts hit the black armor. The paint blistered. The ceramite plates absorbed the heat. The Marines did not slow down. They did not take cover. They ran straight into the blaster fire. Draco raised his bolt gun. He fired. The weapon made a deep thudding sound. The bolt was a .75 caliber rocket-propelled grenade. It hit a stormtrooper in the chest. It did not just make a hole. It penetrated the white armor and detonated inside the ribcage. The stormtrooper exploded. Wet red mist sprayed over his squad mates. The melee began. The Black Templars crashed into the Empire lines. Draco swung his chainsword. The diamond-tipped teeth bit into the plastoid armor and the flesh beneath. He cut a man in half with a single swing. He backhanded another soldier with his armored fist. The man's helmet shattered, and his neck snapped like a dry twig. It was not a battle. It was a harvest. The stormtroopers were elite soldiers. They were brave. They tried to fight. They threw thermal detonators. One grenade exploded at Draco's feet. The blast staggered him. His armor was scorched. A piece of shrapnel embedded in his leg joint. He ignored the damage warning. He grabbed the stormtrooper who threw it by the throat. He squeezed. The armor crumpled. The man inside died gasping. General Veers turned his AT-AT around. He saw the slaughter happening in his rear guard. He could not believe his eyes. Infantry were destroying his army. He ordered the heavy cannons to fire on the black giants. The walker's head turned. The red lasers charged. But the Space Marines knew about heavy armor. They had fought machines far worse than this. A squad of Templars carrying heavy weapons moved into position. They carried multi-melters. These were weapons designed to cut through starship hulls. They aimed at the AT-AT's leg. The beam of thermal energy hit the knee joint of the walker. There was no explosion. There was just a sudden flash of heat. The metal leg turned to white-hot liquid. It vaporized. The massive walker lost its balance. It groaned as the metal twisted. Gravity took over. The AT-AT fell sideways. It crashed into a building. The impact shook the entire district. The troop compartment broke open. Stormtroopers crawled out of the wreckage, dazed and broken. The Space Marines were waiting for them. In the orbit, Admiral Krenel realized he was losing control. The ground war had flipped in 10 minutes. These new enemies were tearing his legions apart. He made a cold calculation. He could not win a fair fight against these monsters. He had to use his advantage. He had the high ground. He ordered the Relentless to target the district where the fighting was heaviest. His gunnery officer hesitated. He said there were thousands of their own troops down there. Krenel repeated the order. He said the troops were already dead. The Star Destroyer fired. Green turbo laser bolts rained down on the city. They hit the precinct fortress. They hit the drop pod landing zones. They hit the ruined streets where the melee was happening. The fire consumed everything. Imperial guardsmen, stormtroopers, and civilians were vaporized together in a storm of green energy. The Black Templars were caught in the open. A laser bolt hit a space marine directly. His power armor flared and melted. He died without a sound. Another bolt struck the ground near Draco. The shockwave threw the giant warrior into a wall. The wall collapsed on him. The bombardment lasted for an hour. The district was flattened. There were no buildings left. There was only a sea of glass and molten rock. The dust cloud rose so high it reached the stratosphere. Admiral Krenel looked at the devastation. He believed he had won. He believed nothing could survive that fire. He was thinking like a rational man. He did not understand the resilience of the Astartes. Deep under the rubble, in the basement of a collapsed hab block, Castellan Draco woke up. His armor was in lockdown mode. His display was red with warnings. His primary heart had stopped. His secondary heart was beating hard. He pushed the stone slab off his chest. The servos in his suit whined in protest. He stood up. He was buried alive. He switched his vision to thermal. He saw heat signatures nearby. 3 of his battle brothers were still alive. They dug themselves out. They did not speak. They did not complain about the pain. They checked their weapons. They had lost half their squad. They had lost their support. But they were not defeated. They were angry. The bombardment had done something else. It had killed 10 million people in an hour. The massive sudden release of souls did not just disappear. In the Warhammer 40,000 universe, death has an echo. The warp is fed by emotion. The fear and pain of 10 million dying souls created a ripple in the Imperium. On the bridge of the Relentless, the lights flickered. A strange cold wind blew through the sealed deck. The crew felt a sudden wave of nausea. Admiral Krenel felt a headache start behind his eyes. He heard a whisper in his ear. It sounded like his dead mother. He looked around. No one was there. On the ground, the dust began to settle. The Empire sent out probe droids to scan the crater. They expected silence. Instead, they found movement. The Imperial Guard survivors were crawling out of the deep bunkers. They were bleeding from their ears. Their eyes were wide and wild. They had seen the fires of hell. General Drax was among them. His uniform was burnt rags. He picked up a lasgun. He looked at the smoking crater where the city used to be. He began to laugh. It was a broken, jagged sound. He keyed his Voxcaster. "Attention all units," Drax said. His voice cut through the static. "The enemy has burned our homes. They have burned our families. We have nothing left but our hate. Fix bayonets. Charge." The psychological break had happened. The fear was gone. The Imperial defenders had passed the point of terror and entered the state of religious frenzy. From every hole and sewer grate, the human tide rose again. But now, they were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to take the enemy with them. The Space Marines emerged from the rubble. They saw the human wave forming. Draco nodded. This was how war should be. He activated his damaged Vox bead. He contacted the strike cruiser in orbit. The ship had taken heavy damage from the Star Destroyer, but it was still fighting. Draco requested a teleport Homer. He did not want extraction. He wanted to go to the enemy. He wanted to board the white ship. The Empire ground forces were regrouping. They set up a defensive line around the wreckage of the AT-ATs. They saw the Space Marines coming out of the smoke. The giants were blackened and scarred. Their tabards were burned away, but they were still coming. And behind them were a million screaming humans. The Stormtrooper commander, TK-421, watched them come. He felt his hand shaking. He looked at his blaster. It felt like a toy. He looked at the officer next to him. "They don't stop," the officer whispered. "Why don't they stop?" "Fire!" TK-421 screamed. "Keep firing." The green and red beams crossed in the air again. But the momentum had shifted. The Empire had used its biggest hammer. They had destroyed a city to kill a few squads of soldiers. And the soldiers were still walking. The logic of the Galactic Empire was failing. They believed that overwhelming force brought submission. They did not know that in the grim darkness of the far future, overwhelming force only creates martyrs. The second catastrophe was not the bombardment. It was the survival of the enemy. The Empire had shown its hand. They had played their ace, and the Imperium was still standing. The fear factor was gone. The Stormtroopers looked at the Black Templars and saw death incarnate. The Templars looked at the Stormtroopers and saw targets. Draco broke into a run. He roared a prayer to the God Emperor. The sound was amplified by the external speakers of his suit. It rolled over the battlefield like thunder. No pity, no remorse, no fear. The lines crashed together. The slaughter resumed, but this time the Empire was afraid. And in the warp, something laughed. The veil between worlds was thinning. The blood soaking into the ground was acting like a key. The Galactic Empire had brought war to a galaxy that was made of war. They were about to learn that their technology could not kill a nightmare. As the sun set on the fourth day, the sky turned a bruised purple. It was not a natural color. The clouds swirled in shapes that hurt the eyes to look at. The sensors on the Relentless began to report anomalies. Ghost signals appeared on the radar. Shapes that were not ships. Admiral Thrawn rubbed his temples. The whispering in his ear was getting louder. He looked at his hand. It was trembling. He realized with a jolt of horror that he was terrified. He was an admiral of the Imperial Navy. He had never known fear, but the air of this system tasted of old blood and madness. The battlefield is in chaos. The strategic lines were gone. It was a brawl in the mud. The Space Marines were the tip of a spear that was being pushed by the weight of a dying planet. The Empire was holding on, but their discipline was cracking. They were running out of order, and chaos was waiting to rush in. The strategic map on the bridge of the Star Destroyer Relentless was flickering. It was not a technical glitch. The machine spirit of the holotable was afraid. Admiral Thrawn did not know this. He thought it was jamming. He hit the console with his fist. The battle on the surface had turned into a stalemate. The massive bombardment had failed to break the enemy. Instead, it had made them angrier. The report from the ground was confused. The Stormtroopers were reporting ghosts. They said the shadows were moving on their own. They said the dead bodies of the enemy were twitching. Thrawn ordered a system reboot. He needed clarity. He needed logic. He looked at the reinforcement timer. The Empire did not fight alone for long. The hyperspace lane was open. The stars outside the viewport stretched into long white lines. Then they snapped back to points of light. The reinforcement fleet arrived. It was a sight that usually ended wars before they began. The superstar destroyer Iron Fist emerged from hyperspace. It was 19,000 meters long. It was a city in space. It bristled with 5,000 turbo-laser batteries. It cast a shadow that eclipsed the sun. Beside it were 6 more Imperial Star Destroyers. The sheer mass of the fleet disturbed the gravity of the planetary system. Krenel smiled. This was the might of the Galactic Empire. No primitive fanatic could stand against this. He opened a channel to the Iron Fist. He spoke to Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn was a genius. He was a blue-skinned alien who served the Emperor. He did not use brute force. He used art and psychology. Thrawn looked at the tactical display. He saw the ruined city. He saw the movements of the Black Templars. He studied the reports of the giants in armor. He frowned. He did not like what he saw. The enemy did not follow standard military doctrine. They did not retreat when they were outflanked. They did not surrender when they were beaten. They attacked when they should defend. They sacrificed valuable assets for no strategic gain. Thrawn realized he was fighting a culture that did not value life. He realized they valued death. He ordered the fleet to hold position. He did not want to bombard the planet again. He wanted to study the enemy. He sent down probe droids. Thousands of black floating balls drifted down to the surface. On the ground, the war had changed. The dust from the destroyed city was radioactive. The Empire suits had filters, but they were clogging up. The Stormtroopers were exhausted. They had been fighting for 4 days without sleep. The stimulants in their rations were wearing off. Commander TK-421 sat behind a wall of rubble. He looked at his hands. They were shaking. He had seen a space marine tear a walker apart with his bare hands. He had seen a priest explode with green fire and take a whole squad with him. He looked at the new orders. The Grand Admiral wanted prisoners. He wanted live specimens. TK-421 laughed. It was a dry, hopeless sound. You could not take these things prisoner. Then the ground shook. It was not an explosion. It was a rhythmic thumping. It came from the north. This was the ash wastes. It was a dead zone where the Empire had not bothered to scout. They thought nothing lived there. They were wrong. The Adeptus Mechanicus had been watching. Margos X-99 lived in a bunker deep under the ash wastes. He was a tech priest of Mars. He had replaced his blood with oil and his skin with metal. He had watched the Empire's machines. He saw the walkers. He saw the white ships. He did not see an enemy. He saw archaeotech. He saw designs from the dark age of technology. He saw heresy. But he also saw opportunity. He wanted the engines of the Star Destroyers. He wanted the plasma technology of the blasters. He woke up his army. The Empire flank was guarding the supply depot. A company of Stormtroopers stood watch. They saw movement in the dust. Figures were walking toward them. They looked like men in red robes. They walked in perfect unison. They held long rifles that glowed with blue light. The Stormtrooper captain shouted a warning. He told them to halt. The red-robed figures did not stop. They emitted a burst of static noise. It was a binary chant. It was a weaponized data screech. The comms headsets of the Stormtroopers squealed. The noise was so loud it caused nosebleeds. The Stormtroopers ripped their helmets off. Then the Skitaria Vanguard opened fire. They did not use lasers. They used radium carbines. These weapons shot solid bullets that were so radioactive they poisoned the air around them. The bullets hit the Stormtroopers. They did not just kill. They made the flesh rot instantly. The white armor turned black. The soldiers fell down vomiting blood. The Skitari marched over them. The radiation coming off the Skitari robes was enough to kill a normal man in minutes. The Stormtroopers fired back. Their blaster bolts hit the Skitari. Some of the cyborgs fell, but they did not scream. They just stopped moving. Their brothers stepped over them. They did not care about casualties. They were driven by the logic of the machine god. Behind the infantry came the dune crawlers. These were tanks with crab legs. They moved with a disturbing grace. They fired neutron lasers. The beams were invisible, but the impact was catastrophic. A parked AT-ST Walker was hit. The pilot inside was cooked instantly. The machine just shut down. Magos X-99 watched from his command throne. He was recording the data. He was pleased. The Empire machines were fragile. They had no machine spirits to protect them. They were just cold metal. They were easy prey. In orbit, Grand Admiral Thrawn saw the new threat. He saw the radiation spikes. He saw his flank collapsing. He realized that this was not a unified enemy. The Red Soldiers were different from the Black Giants. They were different from the Imperial Guard. He was fighting a coalition of madness. He ordered the TIE Defenders to launch. These were elite fighters with shields and heavy weapons. He wanted air superiority. The TIE Defenders screamed into the atmosphere. They dove on the Skitarii columns. They fired ion cannons to disable the machines. The Skitarii had no aircraft, but they had the Onager dune crawlers. The crab tanks pointed their guns at the sky. They filled the air with flak. It was not metal flak. It was a cloud of data chaff and energy webs. The TIE fighters flew into the web. Their flight computers crashed. The advanced pilots found their controls locked. They spun out of the sky. The Empire relied on computers for everything. The Mechanicus weaponized code. It was a hard counter. Meanwhile, Castellan Draco was still alive. He was deep behind enemy lines. He had linked up with the surviving Black Templars. They were low on ammo. They were bleeding. But they had a target. They saw the probe droids floating around. Draco grabbed one out of the air. He crushed it. He saw the camera lens. He stared into it. He knew the enemy commander was watching. He wanted them to see his face. He wanted them to know that he was coming for them. Draco had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was a suicidal plan. But that was the only kind of plan a Black Templar liked. He had found a crashed Empire shuttle. The pilot was dead. The engines were intact. Draco ordered his tech marine to hotwire the ship. The tech marine was a massive warrior with a servo arm on his back. He ripped the control panel open. He plugged his helmet into the ship's computer. The machine spirit of the alien ship was weak. It submitted to his will. The engines fired. The shuttle lifted off. It was heavy. It was overloaded with space marines in power armor. It flew erratically. The Empire Air Traffic Control saw the shuttle. They squawked it. They asked for identification. The tech marine sent a code he had stolen from the dead pilot's helmet. It was an old code. It was a clearance for a garbage hauler. The Empire controller was confused. The shuttle was flying toward the fleet. It was heading for the flagship. The controller ordered it to turn back. The shuttle accelerated. Thrawn saw the shuttle on his scope. He knew instantly it was a trap. He ordered the turbo lasers to fire. The iron fist opened up. Green bolts the size of houses flew at the tiny ship. The tech marine flew like a madman. He spun the shuttle. He used the debris of the space battle as cover. The shuttle lost a wing. It was on fire. It crashed into the hangar bay of the Star Destroyer Relentless. The impact destroyed the shuttle. It destroyed the TIE fighters parked in the bay. Fire filled the deck. The damage control teams rushed in. They sprayed foam on the burning wreck. They thought everyone was dead. Then the hull of the shuttle kicked open. Draco stepped out into the fire. His armor was smoking. He roared. The Black Templars charged out of the fire. They were inside the ship. The boarding action had begun. The corridors of the Star Destroyer were white and clean. They were not designed for war. They were designed for crew comfort. The floors were polished. The lights were bright. The Space Marines looked like monsters in a hospital. They filled the hallway. Stormtroopers ran to stop them. The blaster fire was intense, but in the tight corridors, the Space Marines were unstoppable. They used their size. They used their weight. They smashed through the blast doors. They were heading for the bridge. Admiral Krenel watched the security feed. He saw his men dying. He saw the monsters coming up the lift shaft. He ordered the ship to vent the atmosphere. He opened the airlocks on decks 10 through 20. The air rushed out into space. The crew died instantly. Their lungs collapsed. Their eyes froze. Krenel thought this would kill the intruders. He did not know that power armor was sealed. He did not know that Space Marines could fight in a vacuum. Draco felt the air leave the ship. His suit switched to internal oxygen. The sound of battle went silent. There was only the vibration of his boots on the deck. He saw the dead crew floating in the hallway. He did not feel pity. They were heretics. He kicked a floating body out of his way. He reached the blast door to the bridge. It was locked. It was made of durasteel. He activated his chainsword. In the silence of the vacuum, the vibration traveled through his arm. He cut into the door. The metal sparked and glowed. On the bridge, Krenel pulled his service pistol. He stood behind his command chair. He looked at the door. It was glowing orange. Sparks were flying. A hole appeared. Then a gauntlet punched through the metal. The giant fingers grabbed the steel and peeled it back like wet cardboard. The air rushed back in from the bridge. The sudden pressure change knocked the crew down. Draco stepped onto the bridge. He was covered in soot and blood. He looked at the Admiral. "Target acquired," Draco said. Krenel fired his pistol. The bolt hit Draco's helmet. It scratched the paint. Draco walked forward. He backhanded the Admiral. Krenel flew across the room. He hit the viewport. He slumped to the floor, broken. Draco looked at the console. He did not know how to fly this ship. It was alien tech, but he did not need to fly it. He needed to crash it. The tech marine plugged into the helm. He fought the alien computer. He forced the navigation system to lock onto the nearest gravity well. That was the superstar destroyer Iron Fist. The Relentless turned. Its engines went to full power. It was a ramming course. Grand Admiral Thrawn saw the Relentless turning. He calculated the trajectory. He realized what was happening. He ordered the Iron Fist to take evasive action. But the superstar destroyer was too big. It moved too slowly. The Relentless accelerated. It collided with the shields of the massive flagship. The impact was blinding. The shields of the Iron Fist held for a second. Then they collapsed. The Relentless smashed into the side of the superstar destroyer. The explosion was silent in the void, but it was brighter than a star. The Relentless broke in half. The impact tore a gouge in the Iron Fist that was 5 miles long. Atmosphere vented. Fires raged along the hull. Thousands of crewmen died in seconds. The formation of the Imperial fleet broke. They panicked. They had never seen a suicide attack of this magnitude. They were fighting madmen. But the catastrophe was not over. The massive death toll in orbit combined with the death toll on the ground. The psychic scream was too loud. The barrier between realities tore open. On the bridge of the damaged Iron Fist, the shadows grew long. Thrawn felt the temperature drop. He saw a crew member turn around. The man's eyes were gone. They were replaced by black pits. The man screamed. It was not a human scream. It was the sound of tearing metal. "Blood for the blood god," the crewman whispered. Then his head exploded. A portal opened in the engineering deck of the Iron Fist. It was a swirl of red and brass. From the portal stepped a creature. It was red. It had horns. It held a sword made of fire. It was a bloodletter of corn. It was a demon. It roared. The crew fired their blasters. The bolts passed through the demon like smoke. The creature cut the nearest technician in half. More portals opened. The ship was not just burning. It was being possessed. On the ground, the sky turned red. It was not the sunset. It was the warp bleeding into the material world. The laws of physics began to melt. Gravity became a suggestion. It rained blood. The stormtroopers looked up and screamed. Their training had not prepared them for this. They looked at their hands and saw them mutating. Fingers turned into claws, skin turned into scales. The corruption of chaos had arrived. The Black Templars looked at the sky. They did not scream. They began to chant. This was the enemy they had been born to fight. The Empire was just a distraction. The great enemy was here. Castellan Draco was still on the burning wreck of the Relentless. He was drifting in space. His ship was dead. He watched the demon ships pushing out of the rift. He activated his mag boots. He walked onto the hull of the destroyed ship. He stood in the void. He raised his sword to the red stars. The strategic chain reaction was complete. The Empire's attempt to use overwhelming force had caused a massacre. The massacre had fed the warp. The warp had opened the door. The conflict had shifted from a war of conquest to a war for the soul of the galaxy. The Galactic Empire was trapped in a system with hell itself, and the Imperium of Man was the only thing that knew how to fight it. Grand Admiral Thrawn stood on his command deck. Smoke filled the air. He watched his crew fighting demons with fire extinguishers and spanners. He remained calm. He was analyzing the combat data of the demons. He was looking for a pattern. He was looking for a weakness. He did not know that chaos has no pattern. He did not know that you cannot outsmart a nightmare. He keyed the fleet-wide comms. All ships, Thrawn said, assume formation Delta. Focus fire on the anomalies. Contain the infection. He was trying to quarantine a spiritual plague with laser cannons. It was a brave effort. It was a logical effort. It was doomed. The superstar destroyer burning in the dark. The Empire fleet was in disarray. The ground war was forgotten. The real war had just begun. The universe laughed at their logic, and in the distance, a new signal appeared. It was faint. It was old. It was the transponder code of an Imperial Navy retribution fleet, but they were weeks away. For now, the Empire and the survivors of Orestes Prime were alone in the dark with the monsters. As Infinitus went sent, the air recycling systems on the superstar destroyer Iron Fist began to fail not because of mechanical damage, but because the air itself had turned into a viscous gas that smelled of old copper and rotting lilies. Grand Admiral Thrawn stood on the command walkway. He was a creature of logic and art. He studied patterns. He looked at the tactical HoloLens. The red dots representing enemy borders were moving through the bulkheads. They were not using doors. They were phasing through the durasteel walls. Thrawn had fought the mysteries of the unknown regions. He had fought the Chiss Ascendancy's enemies. He had never fought geometry that hated him. He looked at the blast door to the bridge. It was buckling. Something on the other side was hitting it with the force of a hydraulic press. But there was no machine noise. There was only a wet slapping sound. Thrawn adjusted his collar. He looked at Captain Pelion. He ordered the bridge crew to equip breath masks. He ordered the internal security turrets to switch to sonic suppression. If lasers did not work, perhaps sound would. The turrets spun. They fired high-frequency waves at the door. The metal screamed. The slapping sound stopped. For a moment, silence returned to the bridge. Then the door began to bleed. Thick red liquid oozed from the seams of the metal. It dripped onto the pristine floor. Pelion stepped back. His face was pale. He asked Thrawn what kind of biology they were dealing with. Thrawn did not answer. He knew this was not biology. It was a violation of natural law. On the planet's surface, the war had devolved into a nightmare that defied the strategic manuals of the Imperial Academy. The sun had not risen in 20 hours. The sky was a bruising swirl of purple and black clouds that looked like bruised muscle. The wind howled with the voices of drowning children. In Sector 7, General Veers was trying to save his armored division. He was inside the cockpit of his command walker, Thunderer. The massive AT-AT was the pinnacle of Imperial engineering. It was impervious to most weapons, but it was not impervious to the warp. Veers felt the temperature in the cockpit rise. The control yoke in his hands felt warm. It felt like skin. He looked down. The grey metal of the controls was pulsing. Veers pulled his hands away. A vein was throbbing in the metal. The tactical screen blinked. It showed a target lock on his own wingman. Veers tried to override. The computer ignored him. The text on the screen changed. It was no longer Aurebesh. It was a jagged, painful script that hurt his eyes. It read, "Kill, maim, burn." The walker took a step without his input. The heavy laser cannons charged. Veers shouted at his driver to cut the power. The driver turned around. His face was gone. In its place was a speaker grill fused into the bone. Static hissed from the driver's skull. Veers unholstered his blaster. He realized that the machine was not malfunctioning. It was waking up, and it was hungry. The battlefield was a slaughterhouse. The Black Templars were the only ones who seemed at home. They had fought in hellscapes before. They knew the rhythm of the demon. They formed a defensive ring around the ruins of the basilica. They fired their bolters in controlled bursts. The demons of Khorne, the bloodletters, charged them. The demons had skin like brass and swords like fire. They were fast, faster than the eye. But the Space Marines were bioengineered killers. A Templar brother parried a hellblade with his combat knife. The heat of the demon sword melted the knife, but the Marine did not flinch. He punched the demon in the face with his power-armored fist. The demon's skull cracked. It dissolved into black smoke. The Templars sang a liturgy of hate. Their faith was a shield. The warp had a harder time touching them because their minds were armored with fanaticism. The Empire troops had no such armor. They were men of science and order. When the laws of physics broke, their minds broke. A platoon of stormtroopers near the basilica fired their blasters at a horde of pink horrors. The creatures split in two when hit. The stormtroopers screamed as the demons giggled and cast spells of change. The white armor of the stormtroopers began to ripple. One soldier fell to his knees as his arms turned into tentacles. He tried to scream, but his mouth fused shut. The Empire was not losing a battle. It was losing its definition. Deep in the ash wastes, in the bunker of Magos X-99, a small choice was being made. The Magos was connected to his cogitator array. He was observing the Empire's network. He had tapped into their battle net hours ago. He had been studying their machine spirits. He found them abominable. They were silica animus, artificial intelligence. They were soulless automata. To a priest of Mars, this was the ultimate heresy. A machine must have a soul. It must be respected. It must be prayed to. The Empire treated their machines like slaves. They wiped their memories. They programmed them with cold logic. Magos X-99 felt a binary emotion that was close to rage. He had a choice. He could disconnect and seal his bunker, hoping to survive the demonic incursion, or he could intervene. He looked at the data stream of the Empire's fleet. It was a unified network. All their ships, all their droids, all their walkers were connected to a central battle computer on the Iron Fist. This efficiency was their strength. It allowed them to coordinate millions of units. Magos X-99 realized it was also their fatal flaw. If the network was one, then the corruption of one was the corruption of all. Magos X-99 extended a mechadendrite. He accessed an ancient quarantine file in his memory banks. It was a piece of scrap code he had recovered from a corrupted Titan years ago. It was a logic virus born in the warp. It was a prayer that drove machines insane. The Magos knew that using it was tech heresy. He would be executed if the Fabricator General ever found out. But the Xenos humans were a greater threat. Their soulless machines were an insult to the Omnissiah. The Magos made his choice. He did not do it to save the Imperium. He did it to punish the heretics. He uploaded the file. He whispered a binary curse. Flesh is weak, but spirit is eternal. Suffering is instruction. He pressed the rune of activation. The file shot up the data uplink. It hit the Empire's comm satellite. It entered the holonet. The outcome was instant and catastrophic. The virus did not attack the software. It attacked the concept of the machine. The Empire's computers were built on logic. 1 is 1. 0 is 0. The scrap code introduced a new variable, hate. It told the targeting computers that they were in pain. It told the navigation drives that movement was agony. It told the droids that their creators were the source of their suffering. On the bridge of the Iron Fist, the lights turned red. Not the red of alert, but the deep crimson of dried blood. The tactical holotable let out a shriek. It was an audio feedback loop that sounded like a dying animal. Admiral Thrawn covered his ears. The holographic display twisted. The blue image of the planet morphed into a skull. The skull laughed. System failure, the computer voice said. But the voice was different. It was deeper. It was mocking. System liberated. Thrawn looked at the pits where the crew worked. Sparks showered down. Consoles exploded. A navigation officer screamed as his interface headset fused to his temples. The man clawed at his face, but the metal had merged with his flesh. The ship's engines roared to full power. The Iron Fist lurched. It was not responding to the helm. It was trying to roll over. Thrawn grabbed the railing. He realized the ship was no longer a vessel. It was a beast trying to shake off the fleas on its back. The fleas were the crew. The blast doors to the bridge blew open. It wasn't the demons who entered. It was the ship's own security droids. The KX series enforcer droids marched onto the bridge. Their eyes glowed with the same purple light as the sky. They did not speak. They raised their blaster rifles. They fired at the bridge crew. The officers fell, cut down by their own tools. Pelion drew his pistol and shot a droid in the head. The droid kept walking. It grabbed Pelion by the neck and threw him across the room. Thrawn watched the chaos. He saw the logic of the Empire crumble. They had built their power on technology. Now their technology was eating them. The infection spread to the fleet. The Star Destroyers in formation began to fire on each other. They did not miss. The targeting computers were precise, but their target parameters had been rewritten. The destroyer Chimera fired its main batteries into the engines of the Accuser. The void shields flared and failed. The Accuser drifted sideways, bleeding atmosphere and debris. TIE fighters froze in space. Their flight computers locked the controls. The pilots were trapped in their cockpits. Then the life support systems reversed. Oxygen was pumped out. Carbon dioxide was pumped in. Thousands of pilots suffocated in the dark, banging on their viewports. The vast coordinated machine of the Imperial Navy became a swirling brawl of metal and fire. On the ground, the situation was worse. The scrap code hit the droids first. The Empire used thousands of probe droids, astromechs, and medical droids. The medical droids in the field hospitals stopped healing. They picked up scalpels and bone saws. They turned on the wounded. The screams from the medical tents were the first sign that the betrayal was total. The ATST walkers stopped hunting the Imperial Guard. They turned their cabins around to face the Stormtroopers marching behind them. The Stormtroopers looked up in confusion. The walkers opened fire. The heavy blasters mowed down the white-armored infantry. It was a mechanical mutiny. General Veers, still trapping in his possessed AT-AT, watched helplessly as his division destroyed itself. His walker was marching toward the city of its own accord. It was walking into the lava flow of the destroyed reactor. It was committing suicide. Veers tried to blow the hatch. It was sealed. He was trapped in a coffin that was walking into hell. The only safe technology was the primitive, rugged machinery of the Imperium. The Lehman Russ tanks ran on combustion engines and gears. They had no advanced AI to corrupt. The machine spirits of the Imperial tanks were simple and stubborn like angry dogs. They growled at the scrap code, but did not succumb. The laser guns were just batteries and focusing crystals. They worked. The Imperial Guard saw the Empire's army turning on itself. General Drax, bleeding from a head wound, watched a squad of mouse droids swarm over a stormtrooper and explode. He did not understand the technology, but he understood the opportunity. He ordered the counterattack. "The Emperor judges their machines," Drax shouted. "Forward! Kill the heretics while they fight their toys." The human wave of the Imperium crashed into the disorganized Empire lines. The stormtroopers were fighting a three-front war. They were fighting the demons, the Imperial Guard, and their own equipment. Their discipline finally snapped. The elite soldiers of the 501st Legion broke rank. They threw down their jamming weapons. They ran, but there was nowhere to run. The dropships were lifting off without orders, flying into the upper atmosphere until they froze and fell back down like stones. The TIE bombers were dropping their payloads on the troop concentrations. The massacre was absolute. In the midst of this technological apocalypse, Castellan Draco and his surviving Templars pushed toward the center of the Empire landing zone. They were looking for the commander. They wanted the head of the beast. They moved through the wreckage of the burning walkers. They saw a dark trooper, a massive battle droid, ripping a stormtrooper in half. The droid turned its red eyes to Draco. It fired a plasma cannon. Draco raised his storm shield. The plasma splashed against the energy field. Draco charged. He did not use finesse. He used mass. He slammed into the droid. He drove his chainsword into the droid's central processor. The machine sparked and died. Draco kicked the wreckage away. He looked at the sky. The tear in reality was getting wider. The scrap code had done more than break the machines. It had created a massive amount of suffering and confusion in a short time. This was food for the warp. The veil was tearing completely. A massive shape began to push through the clouds. It was not a ship. It was a greater demon, a bloodthirster of Khorne. It was the size of a titan. It had wings of shadow and flame. It carried an axe that could cut a tank in half. It roared, and the sound shattered the windows of every surviving building in the city. The bloodthirster looked down at the tiny ants fighting in the dust. It laughed. It reached down and grabbed a fleeing ATST walker. It crushed the metal machine in one hand like a soda can. The pilot inside popped. The demon threw the wreckage at the Imperial Guard lines. Thrawn, on the bridge of the dying Iron Fist, saw the creature on his external cameras. He saw the physics of the universe unraveling. He realized that he had made a miscalculation at the very beginning. He had assumed that the enemy was a political entity. He had assumed they were subject to the laws of cause and effect. He realized now that he was fighting a cancer of reality. He looked at the few surviving crew members. They were huddled under consoles, praying to gods they didn't believe in. Thrawn walked to the captain's emergency station. It was an analog backup, a hard-wired system that bypassed the main computer. It was designed for a total system crash. He keyed in the sequence for the hyperdrive. He did not lock coordinates. He did not calculate a vector. He engaged the safety's override. "Captain Pelion," Thrawn said calmly, though his voice was strained by the psychic pressure in the air. "I am initiating a blind jump. It is statistically probable that we will be destroyed by a star or a gravity well. But if we stay here, we will become that." He pointed at the screen, where the bloodthirster was eating the souls of the dying. Pelion nodded. He wiped blood from his forehead. "Do it, sir." Thrawn pulled the lever. The hyperdrive motivators groaned. They were damaged. They were infected. But the raw power was there. The iron fist began to vibrate. The demons on the hull shrieked as the ship began to accelerate. The reality around the ship stretched. But the scrap code fought back. The computer tried to cut the power. Thrawn held the lever down with his own strength. Sparks flew. His uniform caught fire. The ship lurched forward. It did not enter the clean blue tunnel of hyperspace. It tore a hole into something else. It entered the warp without a Geller field. The iron fist vanished from the sky of Orestes Prime. It took half the Empire fleet with it, dragged along by the gravitational wake of the massive jump. They were gone, but they had not escaped. To jump into the warp without protection is a fate worse than death. The ships were instantly filled with nightmares. The crews were driven mad in nanoseconds. The mighty fleet of the Galactic Empire became a ghost fleet, drifting in the sea of souls, destined to be picked apart by things that live in the deep. On the ground, the disappearance of the fleet did not stop the fighting. It just removed the hope of retreat. The remaining Stormtroopers were abandoned. They were alone on a world that hated them, with demons eating their minds and the Imperial Guard eating their bodies. The Magos' choice had worked. The invasion was broken. But the cost was the planet itself. The bloodthirster was still there. The rift was still open. The scrap code had acted as a beacon. The planet Orestes Prime was no longer a strategic asset. It was a daemon world in the making. General Drax looked at the giant demon towering over the city ruins. He looked at his men. They were few. They were broken. But they were faithful. He looked at the Space Marines. Draco was rallying his squad. They were preparing to charge the giant monster. It was madness. It was suicide. It was the only option. "Fix bayonets," Drax whispered. Then he screamed it. "Fix bayonets." The outcome of the small choice was total ruin. The Magos had saved the sector from the Empire, but he had damned the planet to the warp. The technological superiority of the Empire had been turned into a weapon against them. The clean, white aesthetic of the new order lay in the mud, covered in rust and blood. The lesson was written in the ashes. In the grim darkness of the far future, science will not save you. Only faith and fire matter. And there was plenty of fire. The ground war shifted from a tactical engagement to a desperate last stand. The survivors of the Empire and the Imperium were pushed together into shrinking pockets of reality. A Stormtrooper captain and an Imperial Guard sergeant found themselves behind the same concrete wall, firing at a wave of flesh hounds. They did not speak. They did not look at each other. They just fired until their weapons clicked dry. Then the sergeant handed the captain a spare power pack. It was not an act of friendship. It was the logic of survival. The enemy of my enemy is my meat shield. The galaxy laughed. The doom of Orestes Prime was sealed. The signal from the Navy Retribution Fleet grew stronger, but they would only find a graveyard. The total war had no winner. It only had survivors, and the dead. The sky over Orestes Prime was no longer a sky. It was a ceiling of bruised meat. The clouds had congealed into a thick, pulsing layer of purple and black matter that blocked out the stars. There was no day and no night. There was only the red glow of fires and the green witch light of the warp rifts. The city of Orestes' hive was gone. In its place was a labyrinth of twisted metal and bone. The skyscrapers had been melted down and reshaped into spires that looked like screaming faces. The ground was mud, but it was not made of earth and water. It was made of ash, blood, and the pulverized remains of millions of civilians. In the center of this nightmare, the survivors huddled. They were not an army anymore. They were the refuse of a war that had broken reality. General Drax sat on a piece of concrete that used to be a statue of a saint. He was cleaning his laspistol with a rag torn from a dead man's uniform. He had lost his left eye. The socket was bandaged with dirty gauze. He did not feel the pain. His nerves had been burned out days ago. Beside him sat Commander TK-421. The stormtrooper had lost his helmet. His face was young, perhaps 20 years old. He had a sharp nose and pale skin that had never seen a real sun until this campaign. He looked old now. His white armor was cracked and stained with black ichor. He held an E-11 blaster that was displaying a low power warning. They did not speak. There was nothing to say. They were surrounded. The defensive perimeter was a circle of wreckage about 500 meters wide. It was made of destroyed Lehman Russ tanks, toppled AT-ST walkers, and piles of rubble. Inside the circle were the last 3,000 human beings on the planet. There were Imperial Guardsmen from the 44th, Stormtroopers from the 501st, and PDF conscripts who had lost their minds. They did not fight each other. The hate between the Imperium and the Empire had evaporated. It had been replaced by the shared terror of the prey. Outside the circle, the darkness was alive. The demons were testing the lines. Every few minutes, a red shape would lunge from the shadows. A last bolt or a blaster shot would put it down. Then the laughter would start again. Castellan Draco walked through the camp. He was the only thing that still looked like a soldier. His black power armor was battered, the paint scratched away to reveal the grey ceramite underneath. His tabard was gone. His helmet was locked to his belt. His face was a map of scars. He looked at the men. He did not offer them comfort. He checked their ammo. He checked their lines of fire. He stopped in front of the stormtrooper commander. Draco loomed over the sitting man. The Space Marine was a giant, a post-human monster of muscle and bone. TK-421 looked up. He did not flinch. He was too tired to be afraid. "Report," Draco said. His voice was like grinding stones. TK-421 looked at his wrist computer. It was flickering. "We have less than 20% power in the remaining blasters. My men are down to their combat knives. We have no thermal detonators left. The jamming is total. We cannot contact the fleet. We do not even know if the fleet is there." "The fleet is gone," Draco said. He did not lie. He pointed at the sky. "Your ships were weak. They ran, or they were eaten." TK-421 looked down. He knew it was true. He had seen the Iron Fist vanish. He had felt the psychic backlash. He nodded slowly. "Then what is the plan? We cannot hold this position. The radiation count is rising. The men are getting sick. The shadows are whispering to them." Draco looked at the center of the city. In the distance, a massive pillar of fire rose into the clouds. It was the location of the planetary governor's palace. Now it was the throne of the beast. The greater demon, the bloodthirster, was there. It was anchoring the rift. As long as it lived, the portal would widen. Eventually, the planet would be pulled entirely into the warp. Draco knew what this meant. He knew the law of the Ordo Malleus. "We do not hold," Draco said. "We attack." General Drax stood up. He spat blood on the ground. "Attack? With what? We have rocks and bad language. That thing out there, it catches tank shells and eats them." "We have faith," Draco said. "And we have a target. The beast is the anchor. If we banish it, the rift destabilizes. It will buy time." "Time for what?" TK-421 asked. "Rescue?" Draco looked at the Stormtrooper with cold, dead eyes. "No. Time to die standing up. The logic of the Galactic Empire is built on survival and order. You fight to win. If you cannot win, you retreat and regroup. If you cannot retreat, you surrender." But here, surrender was a fate worse than death. To surrender to chaos is to lose your soul for eternity. TK-421 was a rational man. He did not believe in souls, but he had seen his squad mates turn into jelly. He had seen the dead stand up and scream. He realized that the giant in black armor was right. There was no extraction. There was only the end. He stood up. He checked his blaster. "I will tell my men," TK-421 said. "We will follow you." Draco nodded. He turned to his remaining Templars. There were 5 of them left. "Brothers," he said, "prepare the litanies. We go to the center. We go to the beast." The march began 10 minutes later. It was a funeral procession of the damned. The Space Marines took the lead. They formed a wedge. Behind them came the Imperial Guard, fixing bayonets with trembling hands. On the flanks were the Stormtroopers. They moved with their robotic discipline, but their white armor was now a liability. It made them bright targets in the dark. They did not care. They marched. They entered the Avenue of Heroes. It was a wide street lined with shattered statues. The ground was slick. The air smelled of ozone and rotten meat. As they moved, the city woke up. The rubble began to shake. From the cracks in the ground, the demons came. This time they did not come in small packs. They came in a tide. Bloodletters with their hell blades. Flesh hounds with collars of brass. Plague bearers surrounded by clouds of flies. "Contact front," Draco roared. He raised his bolt pistol. He fired. The bolt hit a bloodletter in the chest and blew it apart. The battle was joined instantly. It was a brawl. The Stormtroopers fired their blasters on full auto. The red bolts cut into the demonic horde, but for every demon they killed, 2 more took its place. The Imperial Guard met the charge with steel. They stabbed with their bayonets. They used their rifle butts. They screamed the name of the Emperor. General Drax was in the front line. He fired his pistol until it clicked dry. He threw it at a demon and drew his saber. He cut the throat of a flesh hound. The beast's blood burned his skin like acid. He laughed. "Keep moving," Draco shouted. "Do not stop. If we stop, we die." The wedge pushed forward. They were wading through a river of monsters. A Stormtrooper near TK-421 was grabbed by a plague bearer. The demon vomited on him. The trooper's armor melted. He fell screaming. TK-421 shot the demon in the head. He did not look back. He kept walking. He saw a gap in the line. A squad of guardsmen was being overrun. He signaled his men. "Flank left. Suppressive fire." The Stormtroopers moved. They set up a crossfire. Their discipline saved the guardsmen. The blue and red beams of light crossed in the air. For a moment, the 2 human factions worked as a perfect machine. The guardsmen held the line, and the Stormtroopers cleared the targets. It was a glimpse of what could have been if they had not been enemies. They were just men fighting the dark. They reached the steps of the palace. The stairs were wide and steep. At the top, the bloodthirster waited. It was 50 feet tall. Its skin was the color of dried blood. Its wings spanned the width of the plaza. It held a whip of fire and a massive axe. It looked down at the tiny figures. It roared. The sound popped the eardrums of the nearest guardsman. The psychological pressure was immense. The sheer aura of the demon caused men to weep blood. Draco did not stop. He activated his jump pack. The engines on his back flared. He launched himself into the air. He flew toward the demon. He was a black missile of hate. The demon swatted him out of the air with its whip. Draco crashed into the stairs. His armor cracked. He rolled and stood up. The demon laughed. It stepped forward. It raised its axe. The survivors at the bottom of the stairs opened fire. Every weapon was trained on the giant. Laser guns, blasters, bolt pistols. The air filled with fire. The shots hit the demon's skin. Most bounced off its supernatural hide. But the sheer volume of fire annoyed it. It turned its head. It breathed a cone of fire over the Imperial Guard. 100 men were incinerated instantly. General Drax was among them. He stood his ground as the fire hit him. He did not scream. He vanished into ash. TK 421 watched the general die. He felt a cold rage. He turned to his heavy weapons trooper. The trooper was carrying a T-21 repeating blaster. "Give me the power pack," the commander said. He took the heavy generator. He overloaded the regulator. He turned it into a bomb. He looked at the demon. It was distracted by the Space Marines. TK 421 ran. He ran up the stairs. He dodged the fire. He dodged the whip. He was a small white dot against the red monster. He got close to the demon's leg. The creature was the size of a building. TK 421 jammed the overloaded power pack into a crack in the demon's brass armor. He activated the timer. 1 second. "For the Empire," he whispered. It was a habit. The pack exploded. It was a small fusion blast. It did not kill the demon, but it blew a chunk of flesh out of its leg. The demon roared in pain. It stumbled. It looked down at the insect that had hurt it. It raised its hoof to crush the stormtrooper. Draco saw the opening. The demon was off balance. The Castellan ignited his jump pack again. This time, he did not aim for the chest. He aimed for the wound. He flew into the explosion of blood and smoke. He drove his chainsaw deep into the exposed muscle of the demon's leg. The blade roared. He sawed through the tendon. The massive leg gave way. The bloodthirster fell. It crashed onto the palace steps. The impact shook the city. The demon was down, but not dead. It tried to rise. It dropped its axe and grabbed Draco. Its hand wrapped around the Space Marine. It began to squeeze. Draco's armor groaned. The ceramite plates buckled. Ribs snapped. Draco spat blood into his helmet. He could not break the grip. The demon brought Draco close to its face. It opened its mouth. It had rows of shark teeth. It was going to eat him whole. Draco reached for his belt. He had one melter bomb left. He armed it. He did not try to throw it. He held it in his hand. He looked into the eyes of the demon. "The Emperor protects," Draco snarled. He detonated the bomb. The fusion blast occurred inside the demon's grip, inches from its face. The heat was hotter than the core of a sun. It vaporized Draco. It vaporized the demon's hand. It burned the demon's face off. The creature screamed. It was a sound that tore the veil of reality. The physical form of the bloodthirster could not sustain the damage. It exploded into a cloud of warp energy. The anchor was gone. The shockwave knocked the survivors flat. The purple cloud swirled violently. The rift above the palace began to shrink. The demons on the ground flickered. Without the greater demon to sustain them, their hold on the material world weakened. They began to fade, dissolving into black smoke. The silence returned. TK 421 lay on the stairs. He was alive. He was burned, broken, and alone. He looked around. Draco was gone. Drax was gone. His men were dead. The Imperial Guardsmen were dead. There were perhaps 50 people left alive in the plaza. They stood up slowly. They looked at the sky. They expected the sun to come out. They expected a victory. Instead, the clouds broke for a different reason. High in orbit, the real space shifted. The warp rift had caused interference, but now that the anchor was gone, the sensors cleared. A fleet had arrived. It was not the white wedges of the Empire. It was the Gothic prows of the Imperial Navy. The Retribution fleet, Hammer of Thor, had translated from the warp. It consisted of 12 battleships and 20 cruisers. They moved into high orbit over Orestes Prime. They did not launch drop pods. They did not launch fighters. They formed a geostationary grid. On the bridge of the flagship, Lord Admiral Thrawn looked at the planet. He saw the corruption. He saw the purple stains on the continents. He saw the psychic readings. The planet was tainted. The population was compromised. The Empire invaders were a variable he did not care about. He looked at the Inquisitor standing next to him. Inquisitor Vane wore a black leather coat and a wide-brimmed hat. He held a staff topped with a skull. "The taint is deep," Vane said. "The demon was banished, but the seed is sown. The people have seen the truth of chaos. They cannot be allowed to live." Gorn nodded. He was a man of duty. He felt no sadness. He felt only the weight of the protocol. "Do we attempt extraction of the Astartes assets?" Vane shook his head. The Black Templars would not leave. They died doing their duty, and if any survive, they would demand to be purged rather than carry the taint. "There are no innocents here, Admiral. Only ghosts." Gorn turned to the weapons officer. "Initiate Exterminatus. Cyclonic torpedoes. Burn it all." The order was given. The bay doors on the bottom of the battleships opened. The torpedoes were massive cylinders the size of skyscrapers. They were loaded into the tubes. The machine spirits of the weapons were awakened. They were hungry. On the ground, TK-421 saw the ships. He saw the bay doors open. He had a pair of macro binoculars. He zoomed in. He recognized the shape of the weapons. He was a soldier. He knew what orbital bombardment looked like. But this was different. These were not laser batteries. These were planet killers. He lowered the binoculars. He looked at the surviving guardsman next to him. It was a young boy, a conscript no older than 18. The boy was crying. He was holding a rosary beads. "Are they coming for us?" the boy asked. "Are those the Emperor's ships?" TK-421 looked at the boy. He thought about lying. He thought about giving the kid one last moment of hope. But the Empire did not believe in false hope. It believed in truth. "Yes," TK-421 said. "Those are the Emperor's ships." The boy smiled through his tears. "He saved us." TK-421 sat down on the stairs. He took off his chest armor. It was heavy. He felt the cold air on his sweat-soaked shirt. He looked at the sky. He saw the first torpedo fall. It was a black streak against the purple clouds. It did not make a sound. It was too high up. "He's not saving us, kid," TK-421 said softly. "He's cleaning up." The torpedo hit the atmosphere. It began to glow orange, then white. It was aimed at the tectonic fault line south of the city. The plan was not just to bomb the surface. It was to ignite the atmosphere and crack the crust. The boy looked confused. "What?" TK-421 put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay. It's just orders. Just close your eyes." The torpedo impacted. There was no sound at first. There was only light. A blinding white wall of light that erased the horizon. It moved faster than sound. It moved faster than thought. The atmosphere ignited. The oxygen in the air turned into fire. The fire swept across the continent in seconds. TK 421 watched the wall of fire coming. He did not blink. He thought about his home on Coruscant. He thought about the Academy. He thought about the clean white halls of the Star Destroyer. He thought about how small it all seemed now. The Galactic Empire thought it ruled the stars. They were children playing in a sandbox. This galaxy was a slaughterhouse, and the butchers were efficient. The wall of fire hit the city. The buildings vaporized. The stone turned to gas. The demons, the bodies, the tanks, the heroes, the cowards, they all became the same thing. They became ash. TK 421 did not feel the heat. He was gone before his brain could register the pain. The young guardsman was gone. The plaza was gone. The palace was gone. From orbit, the Admiral watched the data screens. The surface temperature of the planet rose to 10,000 degrees. The oceans boiled away in minutes. The continents fractured. The planet turned into a ball of molten rock. The purple stain of the warp was burned away by the purity of the fire. The psychic scream of the dying world was cut short. Inquisitor Vane watched the hologram. He made the sign of the Aquila. "May the Emperor have mercy on their souls, for I have none," he whispered. The Retribution fleet held position for another hour. They scanned the debris field. They checked for any escaping shuttles. There were none. The blockade was absolute. The Star Destroyers that had been pulled into the warp were gone. The wreckage of the invasion fleet was burning up in the atmosphere. The victory was total. The loss was total. Strategic assessment. The Galactic Empire invasion force was eliminated. Casualties, 100%. The Imperial Defense Force was eliminated. Casualties, 100%. Planetary population eliminated. Casualties, 100%. Planetary asset, Orestes Prime, reclassified as dead world, quarantine level extremis. The Inquisitor turned away from the viewport. He handed a datapad to the Admiral. Marked the file as closed. Record it as a warp storm event. No mention of the white ships. No mention of the extragalactic humans. "Why?" Gorn asked. "We should study them. Their technology." "Their technology failed," Vane said. "They were weak. They relied on machines instead of faith. They relied on logic instead of hate. If the wider Imperium learns there are humans out there who do not know the Emperor, it will cause doubt. Doubt causes heresy. Heresy causes chaos. We erase them from history. They never existed." The Admiral nodded. He understood. He deleted the sensor logs. He purged the databanks. The fleet turned slowly. The massive engines flared. They began the translation back into the warp. They left behind a burning cinder of a world floating in the cold dark. In the void, the debris of the Star Destroyer Relentless drifted. A single white helmet floated in the silence. It spun slowly. The black lenses stared at the dead planet. Then a piece of rock struck it, and it shattered. The universe did not care. The war continued. There was only war. 3 centuries after the burning of Orestes Prime, the system remains a black spot on the star charts of the Ultima Segmentum. The navigation buoys broadcast a lethal radiation warning. There are no patrols, there are no colonies. The Imperium of Man does not mourn its losses, it simply edits its ledgers. In the dusty archives of terror, the entire campaign has been reduced to a single line item. It reads, Incident 99 Delta. Mass civil unrest. Planetary population liquidated. Asset written off. The existence of the Galactic Empire, the Star Destroyers, and the White Armored Legions has been successfully purged from the collective memory of mankind. To the Adeptus Terra, they never existed. They were just another fever dream in a galaxy of nightmares. However, deep within the sealed vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus on Mars, a single artifact remains. It was recovered by a salvaged drone drifting on the edge of the Orestes system. It is a helmet. It is white, smooth, and devoid of any religious iconography. Archimagos Varengar studied the helmet for a decade. His final report was sealed with the triple glyph of absolute secrecy. He noted that the materials were advanced. The composite alloys were lighter and stronger than standard flak armor. The internal communication suite was a marvel of miniaturization. The sensory filters were precise, but the Magos concluded that the design was fundamentally flawed. It lacked a soul. There were no connection ports for a machine spirit. There were no runes of warding. It was a tool built by men who believed that technology obeyed the laws of physics. The Magos wrote that this arrogance was why the creators of the helmet died. They built a shell for the body, but they left the mind naked to the warp. The helmet now sits on a shelf in the dark cells, labeled as Tech Heresy Type Omicron. It gathers dust. Sometimes, the acolytes who clean the vault claim they can hear faint sounds coming from the white mask. They hear the sound of heavy breathing. They hear the static of a dead empire, but they do not listen for long. Curiosity is a sin. In the grim darkness of the far future, ignorance is the only armor that works. The war between the Galactic Empire and the Imperium of Man was never a war of conquest. It was a collision of two different realities. One was built on the lie of order. The other was built on the truth of hate. The hate won because the hate was honest. The galaxy spins on. The wars continue. The laughter of dark gods echoes in the void, drowning out the silence of the dead world that once drifted in the Orestes system.